Hello and welcome back. As usual, you are welcome to get out your sketchbook or open your favorite drawing program and draw along while I am going through the process of this illustration today. And I am going to be taking you through some of the materials I used, the process, also answering a community question about the process of this character, and also talk about who the character is and why I have illustrated him. Let's first of all dive into the art materials. So I did the rough sketch on storyboard sketch paper, which is what you saw at the very beginning of the video. And now I'm transferring that rough sketch and also making some adjustments and changes to create a refined sketch on the watercolour paper, which will be what I'm actually going to illustrate on. The watercolour paper I'm using, which you'll see me drawing on right now, is the Arches cold pressed 300 GSM 100% cotton watercolour paper. I decided to go for that particular one this time because I wanted to sort of test and see how I like inking even on cold pressed paper a little bit more, because of some comic plan ideas that I have coming up that'll be interesting to share with you and might be D&D related. But anyway, that is for another time. For those of you who might be wondering why I decided to do the rough sketch on storyboarding paper, that's actually slightly related to the comic thing though, because I started using that storyboard paper in order to storyboard comics and plan out my comic pages and panel arrangements and things like that. And the paper is really, really thin, as you'll usually find with a lot of sketch papers. And I actually found that the more I was using the paper, the more that I ended up seeing how useful the paper is. I thought that because it was really thin, it wasn't going to hold up very well to repeat erasing, but it actually holds up, at least with how I draw, really, really well. I can erase really cleanly. The paper isn't really affected by being erased even a few times, and I ended up enjoying using it to sketch for comics so much that I ended up integrating it into planning illustrations sometimes, because it's also conveniently around the same size as one of the sizes I like to illustrate in, which is 10 by 7. Yeah, 10 by 7 inches. Which is what I'm doing for this particular illustration today. So I have ended up integrating storyboard paper into my illustration process now. When it came to the inking, I, as you can see, mainly used fine liners and then also felt brush pens for this particular one. No real brush pens this time, just the felt ones. Taking a brief break from talking about the materials and the process for a moment, who am I actually illustrating? This is the character Oën, who is an elf conjurer, and he is an original character designed by the artist Anamardraak. And this all came about because over winter, some of us over in the Sprouting Creatives EU community got together in secret to support Anamardraak through some stuff she was going through by creating art of her characters. So each of us chose one or more of her original characters and then created art based on those characters. Two other artists that took part were Lexi, I'll put her on screen for you now, and then also Hugo Printmaking, who is a lino print artist, also took part, and I'll put him on screen for you now as well. I'll also put their handles into the video description. Lexi was also the one who got us all together to do it in the first place, so thank you to Lexi for organising it all. And with that, we get to the watercolouring. So on screen, I've listed the pigments that I used during the process, roughly in order of how much I used them for the painting. The first 3 took up the majority of the painting, and then the last 3 were used in sparing amounts depending on particular mixes I was trying to reach. So the main 3 pigments I was using were PR122, which was quinacridone magenta, specifically by Core is the one that's in my palette at the moment, and then Azo Orange PO62, the specific one that I have is currently M. Graham's. And then PB16, which in my palette at the moment, it is the My Merry Blue version, and PB16 is usually called Phthalo Turquoise, but it can be called all sorts of different names across brands. And at the moment, the My Merry Blue one that I have is called Turquoise Green by them. But I've seen it called almost anything under the sun at this point. You may have heard me literally putting it down just now because I had to pause the voiceover, go to my watercolour box, take it out to remember what it's called in My Merry. So I did my research for the video for you. And calm again. So what you're seeing me do now for the watercolour process is starting by laying down a yellow-orange through to magenta and then purple gradient from top to bottom. You don't see it in the mixing well on screen, but the third mixing well underneath the magenta colour was a more purpley colour that I mixed with the magenta and the turquoise. Once that was dry, I then put in a blue shadow layer that you're seeing me do now from the bottom of the character and then softened it towards the middle of the character. So everything I was doing at this stage was to lay the foundations to then build upon. My intention was to tone the paper, especially with the main layer that went down first, and then also to have the general shadow tone at the bottom of the character to then put other layers on top of so that they would very subtly affect the overall outcome but not impact it too heavily at the same time. You'd see that in some of the tones that run from the top of the character to the bottom of the character, and you can also see it in the finished background as well, because I do end up going into the background with another layer too towards the end. And after that process, it was a matter of putting in the general local colours of each section on the character. When I'm doing this, I'm usually shooting for the lightest I would be happy having them be, because watercolour is a transparent medium, and in general it is a lot easier to darken an area than to lighten an area. Of course, there are ways of lifting and things like that, but that's not a technique I would want to use on an illustration like this, because it's not a texture that I would want in the final outcome. So with that in mind, I was making sure that when I put down these local colours, that I was shooting for somewhere much lighter in value and intensity than I might necessarily want in the finish. I just want to get down all of the local colours so that I then have context of the entire character. I know, right, okay, this area is blue, this area is skin, this area is hair, this area is wood, this area is this area is that. And then I can go in and actually start rendering them with the intention of how saturated, how dark they're actually going to be. So at the moment, you're just seeing me laying down again, still more foundations. And then I start to go in, add more gradients as you're seeing here, and then also darkening up or increasing the saturation on different areas across the piece as well. And then once that was done, I focused on rendering overall in different areas, but one of the main areas I really wanted to focus on was how I wanted to render the clothing, because Owen wears very loose clothes, so there's a lot of like drapery going on with his character design, and that's actually something that I have a question about. So I got asked over on Instagram, how did you work out the folds? The clothing looks really good. Well, one, thank you, and two, the main two things that contributed to me figuring out the folds on this was intentional studying. So the first thing I did was I studied a bunch of different loose fitting clothes. I both spent time actually looking at loose fitting clothes and really intentionally analysing how they were sitting on the body and what the movement of the clothes did and things like that. So without even putting pen to paper, it was a lot of intentional looking. And then another thing I did was sketching. So I'll put on screen some of the sketches I did with this illustration in mind. And then another thing that helped me was before I even began the watercolouring, as soon as I finished the ink illustration, I scanned it and then digitally I planned out where I wanted some of the layers to go for the watercolouring when it came to the clothing. I only did it for the clothing because I knew that that was what I really wanted to nail on this. So I knew that I wanted to figure out a particular look I was going for. And so to do that, I felt that planning out a little bit of the illustration digitally would really help with that. And it did. It did a lot. It helped just ease me into the process, and it gave me a better idea of what I was actually thinking of doing, which was a little bit more of like a cell shaded look, but combined with gradients and things as well, especially underneath. So I hope that that answers your question and lets you know a little bit more behind the scenes of the illustration process. I was also inspired to just like continue sketching clothing after this as well, because it really opened up just a whole new world of appreciating drapery for me after doing this. So I've still been sketching clothing after finishing this illustration. Let's see, what else can I talk about with the process? Oh, the blue of the top that the character's wearing is not actually the PB16. It's not the phthalo turquoise on its own anyway. It does involve the phthalo turquoise, but not on its own. The way that I achieved a more blue look to the turquoise was I added a tiny amount of the magenta, and that just tilted it from being a turquoise to more of a cyan-ish kind of colour. And I just increased the saturation of each subsequent mix. And I think for the final mix you're seeing me put down here, I did add a little bit of PBR 25 just to deepen the value, but again it was a very tiny amounts, but for the most part it was the PB16. I just had to tilt it a little bit in different directions, and that was how I reached the blue with the turquoise I was using. And then after that it was just a matter of finishing rendering the skin and the hair, which I did leave until last, and then we were done. For the background that you saw me put in earlier, I did a slight gradation from azo orange pretty much just on its own, and then down to more of like a red orange by adding in the magenta. So I added another gradient on top of the previous that you saw earlier as well, and that ended up giving like an orange background that had like subtle tone shifts throughout the background, which is a pretty effect that wasn't too distracting, I think. So I quite enjoyed doing that part of the process. Overall, using cold pressed paper for this was fun. I have used it for illustrations before in a similar-ish style to this, and it is something that I have been enjoying. I'm just trying to figure out if I enjoy doing the painting part more on cold pressed paper, and I feel like I am when I do illustrations like this. I am generally leaning more towards enjoying cold pressed paper more than hot pressed, even though you'd think with inking I'd enjoy hot press more, but there we go. This is what the finished illustration looks like. Thank you for joining along with me today. If you did get out your sketchbook, keep on sketching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.